Welcome back. Today on Dialed In DIY, we have a fun and creative project that could be great for decorations, gift ideas, or just a fun family project. So grab the kids, grab some friends, or just grab some materials and get ready to go. These are the basic items that you're going to need, and I'll explain each as we go along. We're going to start pretty much the same way we did in the video where we made the glowing stars. The link to that video can be found in the description below. Our first step is preparing a candy mold. You may recall that I found these inexpensive candy molds at a local craft store, and there were a lot of options available. We don't want our decorations sticking to the mold, so we need to apply a release agent, in this case Vaseline or some kind of a petroleum jelly. Grab a paintbrush and apply a thin coat of the Vaseline to the entire inside of the mold, making sure to get inside all the nooks and crannies. Step 2 begins with measuring out 4 parts of plaster of Paris. Now I got a large bag at a hardware store, but it does come in smaller containers as well, and you can also find it at craft stores. We'll combine our 4 parts of plaster of Paris with 2 parts of water and then begin to mix thoroughly. You'll notice I'm just using a plastic spoon to stir with. I don't use any kind of an electric device for stirring this because I don't want to create too many bubbles inside the mix. The more we make, the more we need to get out once we pour it into the mold. Which brings us to our next step. You can begin pouring into the molds, but just the sections that you prepared with the release agent. Remember those bubbles I mentioned? Well, it's time to bring those to the surface. By tapping on the mold, it'll actually bring the bubbles away from the decorative side of the mold itself and towards the surface. You can tap it with your hand, or you can tap it on some other kind of a hard surface like a table or a floor. If your plaster is overflowing the mold itself, that's not a problem. Just grab something and make a separation line so that when it's time to remove these from the molds, they can come out one at a time without risking breaking something off of one of the other ones. And now for the hardest part of the project, waiting for these to dry. You need to wait at least an hour before you remove these from the mold, and then at least a total of 24 hours to let this fully dry before we move on to our next step. Place one hand under the mold while you gently push from the other side, and these should release without any problem at all. You can clean up your mold and set it aside for another project in the future, and then get ready to clean up our decorations themselves. What we want to do now is remove any extra plaster from the edges. A knife, razor blade, or a box cutter is perfect for this part of the process. Once I've cut away the bigger chunks, I smooth out the bottom edge with the side of the knife. Now I'm going to finish smoothing out the edges and surfaces with some sandpaper. I'm using a medium to fine grit sandpaper, and I'm not pushing very hard. You don't want to remove too much, you just want to get it smooth. I even smooth off the bottom before I'm done, and you'll notice also you end up with a little bit of plaster dust. We need to clean that up, so I get an old paintbrush and just gently dust across the surfaces to get all the loose dust free. If you want to clean up the surfaces a little bit more, you can actually do what I did and grab a little nail file and just start working the surfaces gently. These are nice because they're actually a very fine grit and they don't take off much, but they make for a nice smooth surface. Plaster is extremely porous, so before you try to paint it, you actually want to seal it. I'm using multiple light coats of a clear matte finished cover. Make sure to spray from all angles and get good coverage in all surface areas, because if you don't, it's just going to suck up your paint like a sponge. Once that's thoroughly dry, I'm adding a base coat of just primer. That way I have a consistent color across all surfaces before I put a decorative coat of paint on. Do make sure to let this base coat dry thoroughly and then get out the paints and have some fun. I like to work with paints that can be thinned out or cleaned up with water. That makes it a lot easier to work with on plaster, and I find the color holds well and really plays out nicely. Decorating these turned out to be a really fun family project. We enjoyed the time together and ended up with something we really liked. Once the decorating was complete, I actually ended up putting 2 coats of spray shellac on top of these and made sure I let it dry thoroughly between. Each time I did this, I always made sure I was in a very well ventilated space. If you want to, you can add a message, the date, or the artist's name to your project. Thank you for watching. please press like and then subscribe. There will be more Dialed In DIY to come.